Hello, dear learners. Welcome back to my channel. In our previous video, we had spoken about a very important Spring concept, and that is Spring MVC. We had introduced ourselves to a lot of different components of Spring MVC, wherein we had understood what is model, view, controller. We had understood all these three terms. We had also gone ahead and understood the whole request response cycle of MVC, wherein how the various components interact with each other using all the three components, that is view, controller, and model, right? Then we had spoken about the whole request response flow, and we had seen lot of terms here like controller, view resolver, view, handler mapping, etc. There were a lot of concepts that we had seen here. There were a lot of terms that we had seen here, and I had spoken about that we will be talking about each of these components that you see here on this slide in detail. So these were some important components of MVC like the dispatcher servlet, the controller annotation, the request mapping, the internal resource view resource, so the model attribute and the bean class. So today our focus is going to be on the first component that you see here, and that is the dispatcher servlet. So this is going to be our focus today, that is dispatcher servlet. We will understand what exactly a dispatcher servlet is, what role does it play, and why is it so important as a component when it comes to Spring MVC. So without further ado, let's get started. As far as Spring MVC is concerned, Dispatcher Servlet is the centermost and the most important component of the Spring MVC. The Dispatcher Servlet, as you can see in this particular picture, is nothing but a front controller, as you can see here. The front Dispatcher Servlet implements the front controller design pattern. Now, I had spoken about this last time also, and I would like to reiterate it here that the front controller here is nothing but a person sitting on a front desk. Any incoming request here has to pass through the front controller, and only then it gets delegated further to the appropriate controller that needs to handle that particular request. Okay, so you can see every incoming request and every outgoing response is getting passed through the front controller. So this is like the most important servlet that we have. And believe me, when I say dispatcher servlet, this is actually going to be a servlet. It will actually go ahead and implement a servlet class. So that is the reason why it is being called as a dispatcher servlet. And this is going to play a very important role in delegating the request to the correct controller, in inspecting based on whatever request URL has come, inspecting based on that request URL where the request should get forwarded. Okay, so there are a lot of components that the dispatcher servlet interacts with throughout the life cycle of a request that or a web request that comes in. As we had seen last time also, there were different components like the URL handler mapping, then the model and view, and then there was this view resolver. So there were a lot of different components that the dispatcher servlet was interacting with over a period of time, throughout the whole from request to the whole response cycle. It interacts with a lot of components from the URL handler mapping to the view resolver. So there are a lot of components that it interacts from beginning to end. So we'll be talking about this front controller or the dispatcher servlet. Now Spring, as you can see, is designed around the central servlet that dispatches the incoming request to controllers, and it also not only just this of forwarding request to the actual controller, it also offers you other functionalities that help you or that facilitates in the development of web applications. It will help you in configuring a lot of other what do you call it? You can say a lot of other services also in your code. So it plays a very important role as far as dispatcher servlet is concerned. It is an actual servlet, as I said earlier. It inherits from the HTTP servlet base class, and it needs to be declared in the web.xml file the way you declare any other servlet. It will have a servlet tag, it will have a servlet mapping tag, it will have its own URL mapping. You will be passing the path of the servlet class. It also has the capabilities of defining init parameters, context parameters for it. So just like any other servlet, this is also going to behave like a servlet, and you will have to configure it in your web.xml file like any other servlet. Okay. Going further, you need to map your incoming request in such a way, or you can say you need to map your dispatcher servlet or configure your dispatcher servlet in such a way that every incoming request passes through this web.xml. So as you can see here, you need to map requests that you want the dispatcher servlet to handle. Now, in most of the cases, you will see people forwarding all incoming requests to the dispatcher servlet, but there could also be cases wherein you are not forwarding each and every request through the dispatcher servlet. There might be only a few set of requests, or you can say only a particular type of request that you're passing through dispatcher servlet, which can also be, of course, configured through the web.xml file itself. So it depends upon how you're configuring your dispatcher servlet, that whether all the incoming requests will pass through it or only specific ones will pass through it. So that again is very important. The way you are configuring your dispatcher servlet in the web.xml file will decide that. So that's one thing. Going further, it is represented by a class called as dispatcher servlet, which is inside the package org.springframework.web.servlet. So when we actually start writing the code, I will show you this particular package in which jar it is. I will show you all that, and we will understand where exactly is this placed. Okay, so we will see that when we start writing the code for it. And as I said earlier, it follows the front controller design pattern for handling all client requests. Also, I have reiterated this earlier already, but I would like to again repeat that a front controller is nothing but something similar to a person sitting on a front desk who caters to every incoming person, and that person is the one who decides where this person should go, to which office or to which cabin or to which person, or whether on the first place the person is even allowed to go and meet anyone or not. Okay, so even such kind of controls can be done using a front controller pattern or a front controller design pattern that we have. So it plays a very similar role to that of a front desk person. Okay, so you can remember it in that ways in very simple terms. If you want to remember what a front controller design pattern is or what a dispatcher servlet does, you can remember it in that ways using the front desk example. So then it will be easier for you to understand. Okay. It also means that whatever URL comes from the client, this servlet will intercept the client request before passing the request to object to the specific controller. So before giving it to a specific controller, the dispatcher servlet makes sure that it will check that particular request and then forward it to the appropriate controller. Okay. So that it will make sure again, also the dispatcher servlet will will have to be defined in the XML file or the web configuration in file in such a way that the request passes, or you can say every incoming request passes through the dispatcher servlet. Again, if you've not configured this particular dispatcher servlet properly in your XML file, then your whole Spring MVC won't work, because this is the basis of the whole Spring MVC working. So every request that comes has to pass through this. That is how it is designed. So if the dispatcher servlet itself is not configured properly, the whole thing ahead of this will not work. The dispatcher servlet itself also holds the path of our XML configuration file that we use in Spring. Okay. There also it has to be defined in a specific pattern that we'll talk about ahead in later slides. So that also is very important. So dispatcher servlet, as I said earlier, also plays a very important role in the whole, not only just taking the incoming request and giving it ahead, but also in all other configurations that we use in our code, because this is where our configuration file, usually REST XML, REST servlet XML file is what it is usually named, or based on whatever servlet name that you give, based on that it is named. So uh, that XML file also is defined here, that where it will be placed. So if this particular servlet is not configured properly, everything would ahead of this would not work properly. Okay. So that being said, uh, for a dispatcher servlet, we need to configure it in web.xml. I've already said this before. So something like this is how you define it. You have a servlet tag. It has a servlet name tag wherein you can write dispatcher. Again, this name can be anything. This does not need to be dispatcher per se. This can be any name, but you need to make sure that when you're naming this, accordingly, you are naming the XML files also. Okay, so you can say dispatcher, then org.springframework.web servlet web.servlet.dispatcherServlet. This is basically the servlet class wherein it is found. Okay. Then you have this init parameter, and I'll come to this a little later. Before that, I would like to come to the servlet mapping part, wherein again I'm using the same servlet name dispatcher, which we already know that when you are declaring a servlet and a servlet mapping tag, the servlet names should match in both the tags. That is how they are able to find which actual servlet class to call from the URL or the incoming request. Again, you can see in the URL pattern. Now, this is going to be very important for us. This that you see, the URL pattern here that you see is going to be very important for us, that it is going to hold this particular URL pattern. Now this here means that all incoming requests are going to pass through it. Okay, so you have to mention that slash here if you want all your incoming requests to pass through it. Okay, so that URL pattern that we have defined here is very important for us. So this URL pattern that you see here is very important. Okay. Now coming back to init param. Now this init param ideally is not compulsory. Okay, frankly I'll say. But if you are not defining this, then the configuration file that we have, this needs to be named specifically. One, it has to be inside the web.inf folder. Okay, that is one rule. Okay, that it has to be inside the web.inf folder. Plus, it has to be the servlet name dash config.xml. Okay, so it has to be then, something like dispatcher. Wait a minute, I'll just write it down here. It has to be then dispatcher hyphen servlet dot xml. And you need to make sure that it is inside web hyphen inf folder. Okay, web hyphen inf folder is where it needs to be, and it has to be whatever is the servlet name hyphen servlet.xml. Okay, then you cannot change this particular name that you see here. Okay, it has to be this only. Web-inf hyphen, what do you call it? So dispatcher hyphen servlet. So because dispatcher, why? Because this is dispatcher here. Okay, that is why it has to be dispatcher. So that is how you need to name it. That is dispatcher hyphen servlet, because the servlet name is dispatcher, as I said earlier. Sorry, I'm repeating it over and over again. But yeah, otherwise, if you don't want to name it like that, then you need this init param. Init param will help you in giving custom location, custom name to this, XML configuration file that we have. So here, as you can see, because I have used init param, and the name of the param is context config location. So this helps us in providing the XML configuration file location that Spring uses for all its codes. And we are saying that it is going to be inside web.inf, so we have not changed the place, but we have changed the name to spring-config.xml. So as I said earlier, this init param is not compulsory. If you can name your XML file as servlet name hyphen config.xml and the file is inside web.inf. If that is true, then you don't need this init param. But if you want your configuration file to be at a custom location, then you need this init param. You can also do this through a custom param and a listener. Context param, sorry, not custom param. You can also do this through a context param and a web listener. That's also one of the ways of doing it. We will see an example of that when we actually start writing the code. I'll show you there how to do it through a context param also. But when you're doing it with a context param, you will also need a web listener. So because we don't know what a web listener is, we will, as of now, ignore it for the time being. Also, load on startup will tell us that this particular servlet has to be the first servlet to be loaded. Okay, so this is going to be the first file that will come. So I'll just ask you or request you to take a minute, go through this whole configuration that is being done. This is very important because if you make any mistake here, your whole code won't work. Okay, so this configuration is very important. So I'll request you to take a minute, pause, understand how the configuration is done. If need be, write it down somewhere when you're actually practicing. This will be helpful. Okay, so just pause your video for a minute and go through this. This is all about dispatcher servlet. I hope you have gone through this configuration and understood it. In case if you have any questions, you can please mention your questions in the comment section below. I'll try to answer your questions ASAP. And also, I hope you understood what exactly dispatcher servlet is through this video, and why it is important and how it is configured and what exactly or how exactly does it work. In our future video, we will talk about other components also that we had seen earlier, like the various annotations that we need. and what is an internal view resource view resolver, and what are the various model components that we have. So we'll talk about each of these components one by one, and then we'll combine all this into one single program and see how the whole thing works. Okay, that is it for today. Like my content, please like my videos, share it with your family and friends, to whoever it is relevant to, or whoever would want to take advantage of it. Also, please subscribe to my channel, and please watch my videos end to end, so that you're not missing on to all those important small details, as I keep saying in my each and every video, that please watch my videos end to end so that you're learning everything that is being mentioned. So that is it for today. Thank you. Bye bye. Have a nice week ahead.